What's up, peeps? In today's video, I'm heading back into the workshop to faux finish a driftwood effect on this small thrift store cabinet. Now, I'm painting, so you know things are gonna go sideways at some point, but I'm not one to back down from a challenging piece of furniture or an attempt at a new finish. I'm Jen. Welcome back to Copper Cactus DIY. Let's get into it. If you were here last week, then you saw me get this thing started at the end of the Show Me Your Workshop Tour challenge. And speaking of that challenge, everyone go give Maggie at Furniture Flip Mom a high five for her win. Congrats, Maggie! During my video, I got this shelf done all the way through a first coat of paint, but wow, sometimes the dings aren't as obvious until that coat of paint goes on, so I had a bunch more wood fill to do. Though you'll see in a minute, this is kind of a waste of my time. And this is the exact moment where I ruined my project. I didn't know that yet, of course, but you all might as well get the full picture. My goal for this cabinet was totally open and flexible. Honestly, I only picked it up because I wanted something small and simple to do for the workshop video. There wasn't a plan, but I don't have the room to store it right now either, so it seemed smart to finish it off this week. I sanded it down to heavily distress the paint to use that as the base layer for my faux finish. Spoiler, bleed through wasn't my issue later. Alright, let's turn this fan off so you can maybe hear me. We'll see. Now that the boring sanding part is done, you can see I went a little crazy. That's on purpose. I want this to be super rustic. I'm going for a coastal driftwood vibe, and I've never seen a piece of driftwood that wasn't ruined and destroyed, so we just ruined and destroyed it. By we, I mean me, because there's no little mouse in my pocket this week. All right, now I'm going to wipe it down and get back to work. I wiped it down with a clean rag and some warm, soap-free water. Chai latte, right? Ew. I started mixing the glaze, still unaware of my impending doom. I used Modern Masters Platinum Glaze and 2 different gray tones from Folk Art's chalk line to tint it. I taped off at the corners to get a mitered appearance, and I taped off on the face. I got busy adding the glaze to the first side, and I used 3 shades to mix and blend the first layer over those lower distressed areas. At some point in the future, I'll go into more detail how I complete this finish. Suffice to say, none of this makes it to the final piece. The first side looked great, so I repeated all those steps on the other side. Tape, glazing, blending, adding details, etc. It all went just great. Super easy, in fact. I should have known better than to trust that. But I still finished off any of the areas that I hadn't finished. I did all that off camera, and I would just like to point out here that I let everything dry overnight. In the morning, I hand painted on knots and details to give it a real weathered appearance. As you can see here, I taped off the opposing section to prep for the overglazing, and it went on great. It was looking close to exactly how I wanted it to, in fact. Then I pulled the tape off camera. So, see this spot here that looks like distressing? Yeah, it's not. This is actually where the tape pulled all my finish off the piece, even though it fully cured overnight, and I know I prepped well. But clearly not well enough, because after the unintelligible string of curse words that I mumbled out through tears, I did the only thing I could. I wiped off all the wet overglazing. Then I used a mix of my 2-inch Purdy carbide scraper and the Craftsman random orbital with an 80 grit to take off all the finish and expose everything down to the raw wood. I think there had been some wax on the surface that I didn't see or feel before applying the shellac. And no matter how many coats of shellac I applied, nothing was going to stick to that wax. This is why it's important to be really careful when you prep. Luckily, this black paint was the plan for the inside all along. I'm using my new favorite black called chalkboard paint and a slightly damp chalk brush to apply it. I'm going to use this Folk Art Home Decor wood tint in the color gray, but it actually is more like this, which has more of a brown tint to it, which is perfect what I'm looking for Driftwood. And I'm just using this big, fluffy, slightly wet chalk brush. So the first thing I'm going to do is just wet down the whole surface. Seriously sopping. I poured some of this out on a little plate. I'll just tip the brush in there and just go directionally. I should point out, once I decided to do the wood tint instead of glaze, I purposely didn't sand past an 80 grit. Real driftwood is tumbled smooth in the sea, but it also has a distinct look and feel due to the salt water that it absorbs before drying out on land, and the 80 mimicked that really well. The pines soaked up this tint, and this tint actually has a little bit of a slip to it, almost like a super thinned out gel stain. So I'll smooth out the surface when I top coat. And while I tint the top here, you can check out all the knots and inclusions in the wood. Because this tint is really sheer, these character marks will still show through. So instead of covering it all up and then going over it to do this with glaze, I'm using some inspo for how to highlight those blemishes through the tint. I added a full-strength second coat after the first coat dried. There's nothing on the bottle that says how long to let things dry, but in my area it's super dry already, so I only waited about an hour before starting the second coat. And I was pretty psyched to still have a visual on those character marks. Because I started my decorative elements as soon as the second coat dried. I'm using some small artist brushes, some of the chalkboard paint in black, folk art chalk paint in Java, and a little bit of the tint to add various areas of distressing and split wood lines. I started with the knots. To indicate lines where the wood might have split apart, I used a very light touch and hand painted along those grain lines. I also went in between them in some areas just to give a little bit of balance. I used brushes, my fingers, even a rag at times to layer and remove the paint. I tried not to go too matchy-matchy or create patterns. And luckily, those naturally occurring knots gave me a great starting point. And I just kept adding, removing, layering, and taking off until it felt right. Just for reference, this clip was originally about 40 minutes long, and the first layer took me about 3 hours to hand paint over the whole piece. After this layer dried, I added a final toning layer of tint over the entire piece. Then I came back in over most of the decorative elements for a final finish coat. But that's pretty repetitive, so I did all of that off camera. The next morning, I came out and tapped in 4 of these rectangular feet. These feet are plastic and they work great so I can slide pieces around the floor. I didn't want to add tall legs to this because I kind of liked it short and cute. Also at this point, I started adding my top coat, and I did 4 total coats of general finishes flat out flat. After the second coat, I sanded between each and I got a super smooth final finish. I couldn't get it done for this video, but I am attaching a back to this cabinet sometime next week. And I'll share those final pictures over on my YouTube community page, so make sure to keep an eye out over there. This cabinet shelf thing took me on an emotional roller coaster, but in the end, I'm pretty happy with the overall tone. The decorative elements? I think I'll keep practicing this finish to really nail those down. Some of them are kinda cartoony, and it's not my favorite, but I am happy with the result for my first try at this on furniture. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, or if you just feel my pain. And also, don't forget to subscribe for more wins and fails in my furniture makeover adventures. I like to share everything because reality is, this job is hard sometimes. It'll put you through it sometimes, but in the end, hopefully you can always come out with a win. But that's it for this one. Beauty shots are coming up. Thanks so much for being here and watching. Later, peeps!